So our time is a bit limited. Let's try to go through this as fast as possible. So please refer to your page that says notes for marking. I've put a few notes there, general and then specific principles that we get taught at practical marking. So in general, what I just do, especially if you have lots of learners, it's very, very important that when you start marking is you go slow and you actually create a pattern for yourself, because otherwise you end up starting to skip questions. And you skip things that you forgot. You actually also had to check that they had to underline it and not just make it bold, for example. So that's something that's important. If you actually have a look, I'm not sure, where did I put that now? There is a video about marking tips, but I'll quickly show you just the basic thing. I'll quickly demo for everyone. I'm just going to stop it and start it again so that everyone definitely has the freshest screen. It's over here. Okay, so one of the things that can help you in marking is to add any ribbon clicks that you need to do to your quick access toolbar. So if I know I'm going to have to click on bookmark, I'm going to right click and actually add this to my quick access toolbar, which I've already done for my latest test. So if I know I'm going to have to go check something inside manage sources, I'm going to add that to my quick access toolbar so that I don't have to go in between my menus to do that the whole time. I can also access that by pressing Alt and then press 8, for example, and then I can go check, oh, there aren't any comments in my document. So that's a fast way, or that's a way to improve the speed of your marking. If you want, something we do at marking is you either give a 0 if a child attempted something but they got it wrong, or you can actually indicate ND, not done, on their script. And I must say that actually creates a different response in the learner when you give them their script back. They're like, oh, what's this, ma'am? And I'm like, you did not attempt it. ND means not done. And it's very important when you use that, you cannot write ND if they actually tried something. You can only write that if they attempted, if they literally did not attempt it. The data did not change at all. But that's quite useful because then they see, oh, I didn't even actually try that, because that is different from getting a 0. And if you do manage to do a diagnostic analysis then it's worth it for your own purpose is to actually analyze which questions were not attempted by a lot of learners, because then you know that's something that you need to revise in class. Overall, please try to implement these marking strategies from grade 10 so that they get used to a strict standard. And personally, I try to set my tests and exams to firstly cover the programs in a similar percentage as to the exam guidelines. So if you go and look at the exam guidelines, what they recommend, if I'll quickly open that up for you. If we look, where did I put that? Exam guidelines shows you what the coverage is. So if you set a test in a term where you did Word, Access, and Excel, then this should actually be the general coverage of that. I mean, I know it's influenced by how much you taught in that term, but this is a good aim to have, right? So that you don't focus too much on one or the other thing. Like, you can't have half the test on HTML, for example, because in exam guidelines, that's not the kind of weighting that HTML should have. All right. And personally, what I do is I don't set tests just from my own creativity. I set tests from past national or provincial exams, rather than using other study opportunities exams, because if you just use study opportunities exams for your tests as well, then learners will only see the way questions are asked in grade 12 for the first time at provincial or like at prelim or that kind of stage. So theory and practical papers, I like to set from DBE papers so that they see, oh, that's the way these questions are asked, just so that they're exposed to a different type of question asking. Because even though I love study opportunities a lot and I do a lot of work for them, they do tend to sort of fall into a kind of pattern of doing things. So it's good to have kids exposed to different kinds of questions. Okay. All right. So overall, the marking principles, if you look at those notes that I've got there for you, I'll just open them on the screen as well. And these count for everything, is you don't penalize twice for the same mistake. So if a learner made a mistake and they carry on making that same mistake throughout the paper, or especially at least through the same question, they don't get penalized again for that same mistake. If they do more than the question asked, you can ignore that as long as that did not impact on the answer. And change is not the same as recreate. So if they were asked to change a graph and they recreated it, they actually lose significant amounts of marks, possibly everything. It depends on how the question was structured. Accuracy is getting a lot of emphasis nowadays. It used to be less important in the past, but the accuracy is extremely important. The skill should be placed on and not next to the text or the cell. So if they said you need to highlight the word important, but they highlighted the word skill, then they literally cannot get the mark. It's not because you were able to highlight, it's also because you were able to highlight the correct word. Okay. There are a lot of questions there where there are things like, there was a question in last year's November paper where 1 mark was allocated for page numbers of the other pages not being affected. Now, you can't allocate that mark if the question was not attempted. Okay, so if there is a follow-up mark where something says like nothing else changed, like say, for example, the first mark was for you set the page to landscape, and the second mark was for the rest of the document remains in portrait. Then you can't allocate the second mark for everything remained in portrait if the kid did not attempt to do the landscape question. Okay. All right. If the question was attempted but something is wrong, then they lose the first mark and you can actually allocate the subsequent marks. So, for example, if the question specified that they should use a function, but they actually used a formula, but the thing counted 5 marks, and they actually managed to somehow get it right with a formula, then they actually only lose the first mark, and they can get allocated subsequent marks. If a learner has 2 files for the same question, you mark both, but you actually only use the one that yields the most marks. So they can't get some of the marks from the one file and some of the marks from the other file. Overall, in all the programs, they need to use standard colors. So if a question asks to make something red, it can't be dark orange. Okay? They actually don't get the mark. It has to be the color that says red when you hover over it. So teach the learners to use that little bar at the bottom that says standard colors. Remember, the question paper is set in such a way that it's friendly to learners who are colorblind as well. So it will always be something where they can hover the mouse over the color and the name actually appears. So let them use the correct color. They are marking more and more strict in that sense. All right, and then just again, change means change and not recreate. There was a question in the HTML question as well, where they were supposed to change the font, and if they inserted new font tags, then they actually lost the first mark. All right, principles in Word. following the precise instructions are extremely important, so they need to apply things to the correct text. They need to use exact measurements. If they had to apply a tab to 4 centimeters and they applied the tab to 4,01, they do not get the mark. Okay? Literally, I know that sounds cruel, but 401 does not get the mark. If they had to change the size of a picture to 15 centimeters and it's 14,99, they do not get the mark. It has to be the exact measurements and it has to be the exact correct place. If it says, please change the indentation of the paragraph highlighted in yellow, then they have to do it on that paragraph. Then they can't do it on the paragraph underneath it. But if they did it on the paragraph there and the one underneath it, then the more ignore principle counts. Okay. All right, so let's start looking at Excel specifically. So I've put a few notes for you over here, but I'm rather going to go through the presentation, and then I want us to actually open a script and try to mark it. So in general, you have to use the formulas and the functions for the calculations in the spreadsheet. The learners had to, and you have to mark from that. The learners have to only use absolute cell referencing where it's necessary. And this one is very important. The formulas and the functions have to be inserted in a way that the correct results will still be obtained even if the existing data changes. What that means is if I have to do a count if for the males, I can't use the criteria and go and click on a cell that contains the word male. I have to type in the word male because someone might have made a mistake on the data and they might go back and change the existing data, and then my function will not work anymore. Okay. All right, so you need to mark the questions from the formula and not the values or the answers in the cell. The only time when you actually look at the value and the answer in the cell is if the kid used something so bizarre that you actually check the answer to see, did it actually work out? That helps you figure it out. But that's the only time you look at the answer. Check against the candidate's actual work. Maybe they inserted an extra column somewhere. They weren't supposed to, but if they did, then you should take that into account. Candidates may use multiple formulas or cells as building blocks to reach answers, but please note, they have to actually refer to those building blocks in the final cell. So if they used building blocks, but there is nothing in the final cell, then they get 0. Because we can't just go and look in the whole of the Excel spreadsheet and search for something where they might have done a building block in a random cell. It has to, the final answer has to be in the cell that the paper specified. If it said the final answer should be in N13, then N13 needs to refer to the cell where you did the building block. Okay. Named ranges can be used instead of cell references, especially if it is an absolute cell reference, remember? And then the answers must still be correct even if changes are made to the existing data. Right. So for last year's question 3 paper, there was a problem that came in with the conditional formatting that caused the files to crash on some at some centers. And for that reason, for this year only, they actually marked both question 3 files if learners had more than one, and accepted the marks from both. But that's not normal operating procedure. Okay, accuracy important again. Don't penalize twice for the same mistake. More, ignore. If the question was not attempted, then you can't award a 2nd or a 3rd mark. All right, we've gone through that. Okay, now this is an important one. We often have questions where there's a, if you look on your marking sheet for 3.2, for example, the question is min or small, and there's a mark for range. And now you've got a print out of this, hey? So at 3.2, you'll see there's a mark for min, for the function, and for the range. Now, that range does not get the mark blindly. If they used a wrong function, the function that was wrong has to be related for them to get the mark for the range. So let's say, for example, if they used sum with the correct range, they lose both marks. If they used large with the correct range, then they get the mark for the range, but not for the function. So the function they can only get the mark for the range if they have a function that is at least related to the correct one. Okay, right. So to allocate the cell range mark, if the function was incorrect, the incorrect function must be related. Right. So the other thing is change means change, not recreate. And don't accept a cell reference for criteria if the data can change. All right, so icons you can add for this question, if you were marking 100 scripts or something, is you could have added the more borders icon and the conditional formatting icon to your quick access toolbar to improve the speed of your marking. In this worksheet, 3.1, the question was change the border color to red to cells A1 to J1 and set the fill color to black. So you can easily see the fill color that was black, but you actually had to check that the border color was changed in red by opening the Format Cells dialog box, because some learners only changed it on one or two sides where you could just see it visually. So you actually had to open the Format Cells dialog box. All four borders had to be changed to get the mark. For 3.2, they had to insert a function to determine the earliest year in which a painting was painted. That was min or small comma 1. If they used small comma 2, then they couldn't get the first mark. And then the range. The range, they couldn't get the mark if it wasn't a related function. The related function would be max or large. Okay. 3.3. Insert a function in cell G4 to determine the number of paintings for which the place where the painting was painted is not given. That was a count blank and the correct range. If they could have used the count if, and then the criteria had to be blank, which is two inverted commas with nothing in between. So there again, a sum wouldn't have earned the mark for the range. Okay. I'm not sure why the marking grid in the example has different ranges. Let's just go according to the marking grid. Okay, so they could have used count if or count blank, but that's the only things they could use. They could get a mark for the range. Okay, 3.4. The function in cell G5 displays the average width of all the paintings in the worksheet. Add another function to cell G5 so that the given formula displays a value formatted to the nearest highest decimal value. Note, 2 decimal places should still be displayed. So they had to round it up to 1 place, but they should still have left it formatted to 2 places, because I think that was the original data anyway. But the average was given. Right. So that's another thing you need to be very careful of in your own marking. And that's why it's so important to go through your own paper beforehand, is to know what was given, so that you don't give marks. Oh, this kid got the average right. No, he didn't. It was given. Okay? Be careful of what is given in the paper, because it's not always blank. And that's another thing you can do if you have too many marks in a paper. If you have to trim a paper's mark allocation, you can either tell them use an average and then you don't allocate a mark for the function that they choose, or you can give them a function that is wrong and ask them to correct it, and then it only counts 1 mark if there's just one mistake in the question. Then it's not always like a 5 mark or 3 mark or whatever function that they have to insert. That way you can trim the number of marks in Excel as well if you want to ask a wider variety of functions. 3.5, insert a sum ifs function in cell G5 to determine the total insurance value, column J, of all the paintings painted before 1900 and where the city in which they are exhibited is Chicago. So the correct function was a sum ifs, and you'll see the question stated that they should use a sum ifs. So they did not get a mark for sum ifs. They got a mark for using sum ifs plus the sum range. That's the first mark allocation. Then the second mark is for the criteria range. And the position of this is extremely important. If the ranges are in the wrong position, then they lose the first time a range is in the wrong position, they lose the mark. Okay, they won't carry on losing marks because they don't get penalized twice for the same mistake. But because remember a sum if the sum range is at the end. No. So if they put the sum range at the end, then they can't get the mark for the sum range. Criteria range plus the criteria, second criteria range plus the criteria. And obviously the criteria range could have swapped. So those two could have swapped as long as the range and the criteria match up. If they used two sum if functions separately and they just used a plus in between, you can only mark the criteria range and the criteria of the first one. That's it. Because sum if plus sum if does not do the same thing as sum ifs. Because what sum ifs does is it asks you to adhere to, or both conditions have to be true before something is summed. Whereas sum if tests one criteria at a time, and then it adds it together. Okay. All right. Then there was a question where they had to do conditional formatting for 3.6. They got a mark for the fact that they applied any form of conditional formatting. So if they applied a greater than 0 conditional formatting, they got a mark for the fact that they used conditional formatting. That's 1 mark. To the correct cells is the second mark. The third mark is the fact that they used the correct type of conditional formatting, which is unique values. And the fourth mark should have been a 2-colored full gradient, but because that caused computers to crash, they accepted any full color in the final paper. Okay, but that's the kind of thing where if they didn't use conditional formatting and a kid just manually applied a full color, they would not have received any marks for applying a full color manually. They had to use conditional formatting before they can get any marks for the kind of formatting that you do. All right, so the 2-colored full gradients in the end did not count a mark because it caused some computers to crash. 3.7, column C contains the year in which the paintings were created. Insert a formula in cell D9 to determine the age of a painting by using the current year. The formula must work for any year. So they couldn't use the year 2018. They had to use a function to obtain this year, today or now. and then minus C9. If they did all of that correct, but they also divided by 365, the more ignore principle does not count because it actually screws up the answer, and then they lose the year mark. Okay. There was a separate worksheet where they had to use a spreadsheet feature to remove duplicate artists from the list. There is a function on Excel to remove duplicate artists, and it had to actually end in row 46. And then lastly, there was a chart question where they had to format the chart to only include the data of all the locations starting with the letters L to P. And they could do that in like a million different ways. There wasn't a correct way of doing that. They could have deleted the actual records that was wrong. They could have filtered it. They could have reselected the range. They could have done lots of things. They then had to change the vertical axis to display units to billions. Okay. Now there you can see that it's actually changed to billions. Do you see the word billions at the top there? That's important. And just note, there were some kids who actually put a text box in there and put the word billions in there. You can't just trust that that actually appeared there by itself. Horizontal axis title was supposed to be location. They had to insert any moving average trend line, but any trend line is fine because that is a moving average trend line. The legend value had to be, the legend text had to be value. So they had to change the legend text series 1 to read as value. And then they had to fill the plot area background with 3 flowers. So that is the plot area background, just the part where the data series is, not everything, not the whole graph. Okay, so the value part you can see on the side here. The moving average is the little line, and at the bottom you can see it goes from L to P. All right. You can mark the L to P by inspection because there are many ways to do that. The vertical axis display in billions. That you actually have to go and check by format axis. All right. Now, there's an important note. If they didn't do the first mark where they changed it to L to P, these intervals will differ, 0 to 1 or half at a time. So this will look different, but they might have changed it to billion still. So you have to look carefully. Location at the bottom. The moving average. And they did not penalize if there was an extra trend line. More ignore principal counts. And the legend text was value. And the plot area background was set to 3 flowers. Okay. So what I'd like you to do now is please go to public if you haven't already copied it. Exam paper training, copy this. Please go to candidate 1. Mark candidate 1. See if you can get to candidate 2 and 3. And then we'll quickly discuss why we accepted specific things and why not. Candidate 1, 2, and 3. So this is under public. Exam paper training, copy this. Candidate 1, 2, and 3. There. And that's what the different color pens were for, to use a different color pen for each candidate. Okay, everyone, I'm going to demo for you in a window, and I'll mark it with you. Let's see what, doesn't matter how far you've gotten. Unfortunately, our time is a bit limited. So for question 3, the first thing you could have done to speed up your marking is you can go to the borders and actually add more borders to your quick access toolbar to get to that faster. And the same with conditional formatting manage rules, add it to your quick access toolbar to get to that faster. All right, so the first one, the border color changed to red. It looks correct, but if I open more borders, you'll see it's actually wrong. The full color was set to black though, so they do get a mark there. So you'll see the papers that we've handed, or the marking grid that I've handed out to you, has these little separate blocks. It has more columns than the study ops memos. Do you see it has like a separate block per mark? So I'll show you, if you want to come have a look here afterwards, how you can actually mark it. You basically write a 0 or a 1 per mark. I'm going to ask study ops to start doing their memos like this as well. It really improves accuracy quite a bit. And that is the way it gets done at national. So it's really worth marking like that. All right, so what I then do is I then activate the formula view. So control and your tilde activates that, and then just scroll over to see the formulas. So literally not even looking at the answers, okay? So cell G3, small and 1 is correct, range is correct, so they get 2 marks. Count blank and the correct range, 2 marks. Now here's roundup and L9. So let's go look at what is in L9. There is the average that was given. So they can get both marks. So this is the correct way to do building blocks. Firstly, you'll see in the national papers, they now give an allocated area for using building blocks. It actually says use this space for building blocks. And if they want to move things around, they can put it in the area where building blocks is supposed to be, but the final answer has to actually be in the cell that the question paper asked for, like this example. All right, for 3.5, sum ifs and the sum range is correct. The criteria range is correct. The criteria is incorrect because there is an equals as well. The criteria range is correct, and criteria Chicago is correct. So that's 4 out of 5. Then the conditional formatting, that was in cells B, or column B. So I'll just click on the first B9, and I'll go to manage rules. Best is actually just to check that it's on this whole worksheet so that you can check if they did apply conditional formatting somewhere else other than the correct place, then they can get the first mark. So don't just assume because it's not in the correct place that they can't get any marks. So yes, they applied conditional formatting. It is to the correct cells. It is not the correct rule because they did a gradient color scale. And any full color, they can actually get that mark. So that's 3 out of 4. Cell D9, they do not get the year mark. They do not get the today mark. They get the 3rd mark minus C9. They get that 1 mark. Second sheet, duplicates. If we go to the bottom, that is wrong. And the shortcut I used to go to the bottom quickly was Control and End. If we go to the chart sheet, data from L to P displayed is actually correct. I know it looks very weird, but they did get that mark because there were so many different ways. The reason it looks so weird is because they didn't actually change the range, but that is correct, that is accepted. The vertical axis displays in billions. Best way is to go to format axis and just check that this is actually billions. Yes. Because as I told you, we actually got sneaky little buggers that inserted a text box here saying billions. So please don't just assume that it is correct. Horizontal axis title displays location. Yes, that is correct. If you want to double check, you can just double check that the axis title is actually on, but that is fine. Any trend line inserted? Yes, we could see that visually. The moving average trend line is displayed, so it is the correct trend line, the correct type. You can see that, you can actually see that from the side here. They wouldn't be able to change that. So that's correct. The legend reads value, that is correct. And the plot area background is set to the 3 flowers image. Format plot area, it is a picture. All right, so that was 7 out of 7. Let's open candidate 2. By the way, I think I've got the training material for about the last 3 years in these folders. So these, the PowerPoint that I showed to you now, this is what you accept, this is what you don't accept, blah, blah, blah. All of that is in the past 3 years' papers in the folders that are on the drive here and on the Google Drive. So it's quite good. For example, before I mark access, I go and look at the past few years' training, and then I see, for example, calculation for query. I can't give any marks if the calculation was done in criteria. I can see that from the training material there. See. Okay. This one, border correct, full is correct. We've got that, we've got that. Over here, you can see he's got a round down 2. So there, 3.4 got 0 marks. Okay, I'm just going to run through this quickly so that, because our time is limited. Over here we've got an interesting problem. So this is a difficult one to mark. So the first mark they lose because they used a count ifs instead of a sum ifs, even though the question specifically stated sum ifs. Okay, so the first mark they lose. The second mark, so even though this syntax is correct, almost, except for the second comma, the second mark they lose because of the second comma, because that actually causes that to be in the wrong position. But we can't continue penalizing them for that. So from there on, we can actually award 2 marks at least. So we can award for 1 set of criteria and criteria range. So this range was wrong, okay? And this one, they lost the mark, even though it was the correct range, but they lost the mark because of the extra comma. The extra comma caused it to be in the wrong position.
So there's someone she's semicolons.
Yes. No, it's not about 2016, it's about the windows. Okay, so you're supposed to change it if your center is in semicolons, according to exam guidelines and training. So if yours is not, please speak to Natasha about how to go about that. If it's colons or semicolons, it comes out to the same thing, but yours is supposed to be commas according to. Hey? Yeah, even if yours was done on semicolons, if I open it on a computer with the correct settings, it opens up as commas. So that's not a problem. Hey? Yeah, it's about the regional settings in Windows. But if you look at if we do exam readiness training, we actually very clearly specify that it should be fixed because, yeah, that's just the. We'll do that in exam readiness training. Okay.
The Cisco stuff as well to use. with the link and the open domains that you can purchase.
Okay, so let's quickly look at the conditional formatting. This worksheet, let's check, was there anything? No, there was no conditional formatting done. So this will be an ND, a not done. Basically, a not attempted. Okay? 3.7, they lose the year mark, but they get the now and the C9 mark. Duplicates. Oi, wrong. Also wrong. And the chart sheet, this is an interesting one now. Okay, so the first mark they get for data from L to P. Second mark, let's format the axis because it looks correct, 0 to 3.5. But the display units is not billions. Do you see that? That's why you have to check the stuff properly and not just mark visually. Okay, so they lose the second mark. The third mark, location, is correct. The fourth mark, any trend line inserted that they actually get, even though it doesn't show here, the fact that it shows in the legend means they did insert a trend line. Okay. The trend line was actually inserted. If I go to more options, you can see a trend line was inserted. Now that I did that, it actually inserted an extra one. But let's undo that. They inserted a trend line. Fourth mark is correct. Fifth mark is correct. It is a 2-period moving average. So even though I can't see it, it is correct. The legend text is value, correct. And the seventh mark is wrong. Do you see what happens? The kid put a picture behind the graph. The sneaky little buggers. Okay. They do not get that mark. You have to actually figure out the funny tricks that they do. And that's why you can't just mark things visually. If there's a setting that you can check, please check the setting. That's the bottom line. Okay, so format plot area, full, automatic. It's not set to picture. That's how I can see it. But we learned that if you move it, you can see if there's a picture behind the thing. Okay, so that's actually what this kid did. Clever. Must have taken them quite a while.
Give them 10 marks for initiative.
Okay. So unfortunately, we don't have time to go through the question 4 and question 5 as well. I want to quickly go through question 4, number 4.5, because that one taught me so much in terms of principles. So I'm just going to show you 1 or 2 questions or difficult examples of that. Okay, so column L showed the number of 4 votes an artist received for his or her artwork. We had to insert a function in cell N8 to determine whether the artist has one of 3 of the 3 highest votes, which we can find in column L. Display the message top 3 if the artist is in the top 3, or otherwise leave the cell empty. Ensure that the function can be copied down to the other cells in the range. We had to check for building blocks, very important, and that was the final function. If L8 is greater than or equal to large of L8 to L57, third largest, then it must be top 3, otherwise blank, and then there had to be absolute cell addressing for the last mark so that we could copy it down. All right. So you had to be careful for alternative solutions that they did a greater than 4 large, that they did a less than if they did it the opposite way, if they first did large and then did L8. Okay. And if they did a nested if and they just did equals, 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 the first largest, second largest, third largest, then they could also get the marks. Okay, so those are all alternative solutions. They could even use an or in the if. This was the most interesting question, I think. No, there was one more interesting question to mark, but this was quite an interesting one. I'm quickly going to open candidate, I'll just do candidate 2 anyway, because I've got it open here anyway. I think each of these has funny things they did here. Oh, candidate 2 is actually a straightforward one, but let's quickly look at that. So on page 9 in these marking guidelines, if you want to look with me. So they get the first mark for the if function. The second mark for if L8, they get the mark. Greater than or equal to, they get the mark. They lose the mark for large L8 to L57. They lose the mark for large the third. The correct output top 3, they get the mark. Correct output for value if false, they get the mark. And they lose the last mark for absolute cell addressing. Okay, so that one wasn't too difficult. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they get 5 out of 8. So basically what this kid did is they actually went and they even went to the effort of doing a top 3 conditional formatting in this column. And then they found the actual value and then used that in the function. By the way, if they... okay, no, I'll use another example to show that. Let's do the second, another candidate 1. Oh, they came up with the strangest things in this question. And these are my kids. I opened my kids' stuff. And I was like, what did you do? Okay, so check this one. Okay, so what this child did is they used the building blocks. They did large 1, large 2, large 3. And then they didn't use that in the final function. Bloody kids. Okay, so, all right, let's see how to mark this. So, they get the mark for the if. Now, because they actually refer to the building blocks, they get quite a lot of the marks. They get the mark for L8. The equals to, remember the one alternative was that they could do the large 1, large 2, large 3 separately, that it's a nested if. Okay, so because they actually tested for all 3 large ones and they just didn't use the last one, they actually got the greater than and equal to mark. All right? They got the large L8 to L57 mark. They lost the mark for comma 3 because they only tested in here for large, the second largest. Okay, so basically if you look at your marking grid, they would have lost either the third or the fifth mark because they only tested up to the second largest. But they could not have lost both because it is the same mistake. Do you see? Otherwise, I'm penalizing them twice for the same mistake. All right? Then the correct output, if true, they did not get the mark because there aren't any parentheses around it. Do you see? So no mark for that. Correct output, if false, they get the mark. And they lose the mark for absolute cell addressing. If this was absolute, they would have gotten the mark, but they did not get that. Interesting ones, hey? And this is why I'm saying I feel I have the need for actually being able to ask other teachers how to allocate marks while I mark study opportunities papers or my own exams. It helps a lot being able to ask them, how would you allocate this or how would you allocate that? But it also helps going through these past papers and looking at the training. I'm just going to do a last one quickly. Let's quickly look at candidate 3. Sorry, this is so interesting. They do the weirdest things. Let's just run through this. The only mark the kid got here, they actually got the mark for L8 because they tested here equals L8. You see? So they got this one mark, L8. So don't just, also there's another lesson, is don't just assume because they did something completely wrong that they can't get any marks. Look for a mark. Try to, that's always what we get taught at the practical exam center. Have the interest of the learner at heart. Even though we are marking strict, yes, we have to mark strict. Have the interest of the learner at heart. See where you can allocate a mark. Don't just be like, oh, this is all wrong. Okay, please see where you can have the interest of the learner at heart. I just quickly want to show you this one. Here is an example where they lose a mark for a criteria referencing. This was for question 4.3, where they actually had to count the nationality of non-French citizens. Now, this is also a complicated question to mark, but if you just look at this, even if the question was just count the French citizens, they would not get the mark for this criteria because the criteria is referring to a cell in the data range. They may not do that because the data range may change. Even if they make it absolute cell referencing, they may not do that. Okay, they have to write out the word French. If they really want to click on a cell, then let them write the word French somewhere else or in the building blocks area, and then they can click on French. But just type it, man. Goodness gracious. Okay. Please. Hey? No, that's it. You can come forward. Please, the position of the principles in Access, if you just quickly refer to your marking notes over there. Just one or two tricky things that I just want to point out to you. The position of the answer is very important. In Access, just want to open one for you. In a table, I always feel so sorry for them, but if they did a validation rule and they did it in the default value by accident, they get no marks. Absolutely nothing. Even if it counted 6 marks, they get no marks. And the principle for that is that they can't go looking in all the other properties for something that you should have done. So even if it's just wrong by one little row, they can't get any marks if it is not in the correct row. Okay? And the validation texts can only ever get the marks if it refers to the values that the validation rule had to contain. Okay? And if, for example, they left out the equals to, they only lose the mark once. They don't carry on losing the mark. For a calculated query, if they did the perfect calculation, but they did it in criteria, they can't get some marks, they get no marks. Okay? No marks if criteria, if calculations are in criteria. And yeah, that's the basics I can quickly tell you. Cheryl is going to take over in HTML quickly. Sorry for cutting this so short.
No, you can have more time because I'm going to be very quick.
No, I'm done.
Sure.
Yeah, there you go, HTML.
Any questions so far? Does it just spark something? Think thought of your own practice marking? Yeah. So guys, please apply for marking. Whether it's theory or practical, please apply.
This is yours.
6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I opened that.
Sorry, baby. You probably did. Sorry.
I'm just very easy to do. I'm going to be using the study of
Yes,
the prelim exam. Who will be using the practical end theory for the prelim exam for the study?
I want to this year use I want to use the GDE one this year. I bought the study ops, but I want that one.
You can alternate it. You can do one practical, maybe the department one, then the study of theory.
But let's quickly do this first and then.
Right, guys, it's been a long day, and if you're feeling as tired as I am, we're going to try and keep this a little bit neat and short. Right. One of the biggest things that at marking that we do for HTML is if you do anything in Word, as soon as we identified that it was in Word, we had to just scrap the whole thing and give the child a note. Okay. And they might have done a beautiful HTML thing, but if it's in Word, we have to give a note, right? So you have to mark it in HTML. I cheat because I know how to do the right click and I go save show page as, but I'll put a little bit of history behind it. I did 20 years of advertising. In the last 3 years, I actually ran a website for Justin Avon. So I know a little bit about the stuff, so I don't really need to see it in that. But for you guys, I think it's important that you can see the colors, so you can see where they're going, what they're doing, and how the stuff works. So open it up into the HTML code, which is Notepad++. If you use Notepad+, it doesn't give you many hints, okay? Couple of things. You will find that your numerical values actually don't have to have the inverted commas, right? I knew that, but we started insisting on it when we were teaching HTML. You don't have to have it, okay? But you have one word that isn't in inverted commas, we penalize you. But if we don't penalize you if it's more than one in inverted commas, you know, like the type of font it is, the color it is, and all that, we then have to start penalizing. And if the equal symbol obviously is left out, we again only at the first occurrence, right? Because a lot of us realize that the kids who are doing our subject are not the genii. The guys that are trying to pick up a subject. If you're lucky like me, I've got a genius at my class. Don't know why she chose cat, but she did. Then you're lucky, okay? So when you change something, you do not completely change it. You're just changing the wording or whatever. You don't recreate it. New tags, they've been inserted at first. We nail it. Again, we're looking after people. Now, I've got a trend thing which was in the first slide, and I just want to show you what happened. People are choosing HTML. Why? It's worth 20 marks. And if you know your stuff, you hit 20 marks quickly and easily. And it's not a long process if you know your stuff. That's why I'm going to go to the last slide just now. If you know your stuff, you got 20 marks up, boom, before you even start. And if you realize how practical works, it's 1 mark a minute, yes? So if you know your stuff, HTML, if you know it, can do you 5 minutes, you're done. In 5 minutes, you've got 20 marks. That's awesome. So people are choosing a lot of it. So let's go back to where we were, and let's just check and see what we were asked to do. 6.1, you had to change the font. 6.2, the line. And the reason why the kids don't get line is because they don't understand HR means horizontal rule. As soon as you get that into their heads, then they change the line. And then it's so easy to apply the rest, the 60%, alignment to right, etc. Heading in italics, straightforward, little I. Eccentricity to link, it's always a reference, href. List number format, you either have an ordered list or an unordered list. Easy peasy, get them to understand that. And then cell spacing, this is where I think the kids get the worst, is they don't understand the tables. Okay, so if you're going to do the PAT, get them in their HTML to do tables. Get other examples. Give it to them and say to them, just adjust it to fit with yours. Because once you learn how the column spacing and column width and all that kind of thing works, they're away. And that's, I think, the reason why this year the kids didn't do too well, is because they didn't understand the table side so much. Okay? And then the last is display in bold and your positioning of where you have to put the stuff. Pretty straightforward. So this is what they were given as a file, page 1, page 2. Please try and tell your guys, those little things in green are called comments. They don't show up on the screen because they're comments. So if you're trying to do anything, do it near those comments. Don't delete them. I have kids delete all of them. And I'm trying, going mad. Where am I finding this stuff? Okay? So you try and train your kids where that green stuff is, where the comment is. Okay? That's where you go, and that's where you need to do for that particular question. And then if they ask you to put something inside that no one can see, put it inside that green stuff. It's the comments. Put it inside the green. No one's going to see it. And that was a question the year before. Put the words inside there. So this is what they were given to do. And just watch out. They changed it this year. Last year, the year before, sorry, they actually penalized people if they didn't have all the tags closed. You know those little crocodile guys? If you didn't have them closed, they took the marks off, and we only did once. This year, they decided, okay, we're not going to penalize them. If they've done the crocodiles, we are going to add an extra mark in. And it's at the beginning of the question paper, it tells you that you are going to get a mark if all your tags are right. But it's allocated at the end of the paper when we were marking. So if you can see, it says nesting tabs, everything correct, right? You'll get a mark. And here we go. Change the font face to Vivaldi. Easy peasy? Yeah. Once kids understand what all those little guys mean, they then understand where they have to go and what they have to do. They always just have to remember that Vivaldi and those are in inverted commas. Because if you just type straight Vivaldi in, not going to happen. If you make a typing error, you're not going to get the mark. It won't happen. Okay. And at this one here, they asked it to do it for the whole document. In the previous exam, they actually took marks off because people put it in the whole document. They forgot to close the font. Here, you didn't have to close the font until the very, very end. Okay? Face Vivaldi, mark. Width of the horizontal line, HR, 60%. Align right. And this is where I'm probably going to be a bit more challenging than most. HTML is changing. If you go for Java 5, you don't have to write all of this. It's div align. If your kids give you div align in your pracs, go and check it out. It's correct. And you'll see that the thing lines up the correct way. Because div align is the new wording. We are still with HTML5, and we still say align equals right. Just be aware of what the kids can give you, because you're going to do your PAT soon, phase 3, and they're going to give you this kind of stuff. Go look it up. The whole new way of doing Java is completely different. It's like learning Python. Okay? So, right. Then you have to take, believe it or not, this one's the easy one, I for italics. But in Java 5, I is no longer I, it's completely different. So just keep checking your kids' work and Google. I know we're not allowed to say that. Google's your friend. Just double check it. Okay. Heading 2, change it to italics. href. Straightforward. href to eccentricity. You link it on that text only. If you don't link it on that text, you don't get the mark. And it must be added correctly. href. And they've got that table at the back. With my learners, they come and they get stuck. I just show them the table and I point and say, just read. Just read. That's all they need. okay? And they'll pick it up. And then target location is weird, and they're your marks.
If they change the target location themselves,
Yes,
and they then did this correctly, so they changed the bookmark name,
yes,
did they get the mark?
yes.
Okay.
If they've changed it and it works, they will get the mark. But they have to have changed
So
it.
they had to change it then,
Yes.
the target location and then in the link.
So that's why it's a challenge again when you're doing a project. So just double check they've gone to the right place. Only first mark if a new link is inserted. Not if it's correct. A new link.
Yes, so like a whole new anchor.
Okay. So you add tags to this. This is ordered lists and unordered lists. Straightforward. Please get your learners to understand this stuff. It's easy peasy. You've either got numbers or you've got letters, and you can use little bullets, pictures, things. Go for it. Make them play with it. Check out their projects. Tell them to Google. I promise you it works. Okay? Straightforward. Again, remember, when you put in your ordered list, you must always have an end of the ordered list. And then when you do your links, link 1, end. Link 2, end. Link 3, end. If you don't, then your picture doesn't come up. Okay? This is the one that I think the kids are not understanding too well, is the tables. They don't understand the concept of a table. How many columns? Because the wording is different to what they're understanding, right? So you've got to spend a little bit more time. I think this is where we all fell down in terms of all the kids, 51% of them did the thing, but they didn't do too well. And it's because they don't understand about cell spacing. Okay? And then they don't understand about how many columns. They don't understand about the various things that go with making a table. A border, distance between the columns, okay? Get them to understand that once you've got that, they're going to crack this. They're going to get their full 20 marks. And it'll be 20 marks for 5 minutes and you're away. So let's have a look. Cell spacing 6. Column span. Column span is how many columns you have, right? It said they must have 3 columns, and a lot of them only had 2, or they forgot about the various ones. Column span is easy. Once they get the concept, then they will get it right. You can actually have TH, which is height column. TH, not TD, which is a particular thing. It's that you can do TH instead. No problem. It would have been accepted because you will still have the same results. Okay. You've got to change it to 3. Tell the kids to look. When I've done this exam with my guys, they don't look, but that's kind of how my guys are. If it's got 4 and they ask for 3, change it to 3. It's there. Sitting there, just waiting to be changed. Okay? Then you had to make Michelangelo suddenly be found in the table. And Michelangelo had to be changed to image SRC. This part they also don't get. SRC. What does it mean? Source. Exactly. Once they got that, oh man, that means where we go look for it. Yes, done. We're in. So once they get that, it's cool. And then the most important part now with the HTML we're teaching is that you have to have dot extension. 3-letter whatever. JPG, PNG, whatever it is, whatever the picture is, and the picture must be in the folder that you're working on. If it's somewhere else, you have to do a whole link, C:// to where it is, and then it'll bring the picture in. So tell them, teach them early, make your projects, put it all in one folder, put your pictures in there, and whatever it's called, .jpg, .png, whatever, put it into there and link it. If it doesn't have that extension, then it doesn't link. And they come crying to you, ma'am, I've got a cross. There's a cross on my screen. Okay, let's have a look at the code. Duty, you're supposed to have a dot something, something, something. Oh, once I got that, you're away forever. And then they changed, in various years, they changed the height, they changed the percentage or whatever. And then they've got this one, the rows. Store pens, never based, carried a gun. Ooh, I like these topics. So the last thing is that you have to create a new row. When you're looking through your coding, the last thing you have to have there is a new row. Once you've got the new row in, you can put this. And how do you add a new row? Crocodile TR in crocodile TR. Simple and straightforward. And then you can add in the first thing, which was never carried a gun, never bathed, carried a gun, all of those are in at the bottom. They're coming beautifully. And if your kids are struggling, which is I have often, I make them go back and I tell them, try again. Because if you feed them the information, they're not going to remember it in an exam. They don't remember it. But if you say, try it again, dude, I can see something's wrong there. Just try something else. Maybe you've put a little bit of coding wrong. And you send them back. It works like a treat. Okay, and then modify the coding. Text shocking but true. It must be under the table. So in table first. Put the wording there. And then it must be in bold. Bold is B. For now. It's going to change. Because, we've had this wonderful guy, come and teach us. The majority of what he's telling us about, I've already done. So I'm just going to jump in and grab the opportunities because I've done Scratch, I've done robotics, I did Turbo Pascal C++. I've done all of that. So all I'm saying is, guys, take it. Well, I paid for it when I had to do it. I did 7 years of teaching, 4 in GDE, 3 in private school, and went to 20 years of advertising. And decided that advertising, it's okay, but really my passion is in teaching. That's why I'm here today. Because teaching, there's the closing tags thing, which I mentioned earlier on. Teaching, if you are passionate about it, is what you're going to do, right? Because who are you doing it for? Kids out there. And some people will understand that I'm at a very special school. The last thing I want to show you is the results. I'm not going to test you or ask you to test anything. I just want to show you. Sorry, Claire, your mouse is a bit sensitive. Feedback. The feedback for HTML. 51% attempted. Average 51. Not attempted 8. 92% people attempted it. Okay, so this kind of thing you're going to get as info. Change font done well, whatever. But if you look carefully, you'll see that it becomes the table that's causing the problem. And there was one debate that I was marking for Claire the one day, and we had a big debate. And it was about how you nest everything. Okay? So you must say, font, H1, end font. Bold, bold, italic, italic. And she's right. Because when you start doing coding, if you don't do it in the correct order, it doesn't work. And that's why they're allocating the mark for that. Are there any questions?
Just a recommendation. This works quite well. I've laminated the HTML tag sheet that they get for the final paper. And whenever we do HTML in the class, I let them practice from this so that they know where to look on the page. And even for the study ops papers, I hand this out for them to look from so that they know, oh, that's always where bold is, that's always where image is, so that they actually know the layout of this specific sheet. That helps a lot as well.
So, okay, no questions, great.
The page is updated for next year's cafe, but you work with that training needs to trigger. Just quickly, I think everyone just now. This book that Claire has done as well, for your matrix, I recommend that you actually just let your matrix focus on this right now if you've done your syllabus. She's taken the past, how many? Many, and divided into questions, into applications, into specific questions as well. The VLOOKUP, all the VLOOKUP